Hello and welcome to MSA Studies. Today we will be talking about different types of studies, typically a type 1 study, a type 2 study, or a type 3 study in a regular MSA study. My focus in this presentation is going to be a type 2 study, which is also known as a gauge R&R study. Okay. So just as a base, a type 1 study is a study where you look at the gauge's repeatability and accuracy of the gauge by running a master part, usually 50 times, in order to find a CG value and also a CGK value. So a repeatability value as well as an accuracy value. Then once you've done that, you move over to a type 2 study. So for a type 2 study, we typically focus on repeatability and reproducibility, and hence the R&R. So gauge R&R percentage is what we look for. So different number of operators, different number of parts, different number of trials, a combination of which is used in order to come up with a percentage R&R, gauge R&R. So for a type 2 study, the preferred method is the ANOVA method. There are other methods also that are used, and typically a gauge R&R percentage would depend on whether you want it to be less than 10% of your overall tolerance or 20% of the gauge tolerance. You can make those decisions. But in most cases, or in all cases, you may not exceed greater than a 30% gauge R&R percentage. Oftentimes, a type 3 study is done. So type 3 study is where it is also referenced as a gauge R&R study, but the human element or the operator element is taken out of the equation, and only hence the repeatability is looked at. So it is no reproducibility because there's no operator influence. So a type 3 study can be used as a special case of a type 2 study. So usually in a fully automated system, or usually where a robot would unload a part and place it onto a CMM for measurement, you could typically do a type 3 study. So in our software, the QDAS software called Solara, I would like to open up, and we would like to have a look at the software. So essentially we would click on the Start menu, scroll down to area where it says QDAS QM Tools, and the most current version is version 13. So we want to go to QDAS QM Tools version 13 and click on V13 QDAS Launcher. Once you do that, a listing of the different software that you currently have purchased will appear. So the far left-hand side, as you can see, it is QDAS Solara. That is the software that we want to use. There are other software shown also, but the QDAS Solara is the one, .mp is the one that we want to launch. So I click on QDAS Solara.mp. And it, based upon the license that you have, the registration window is generally going to take you as a super user for the username, and all you'd have to do is click on OK. This is the version of the software that I have installed onto my computer. Then I will look for a type 2 study file. So typically, I'll just click on, so you can see QDOS Solara. Okay, so typically I'll click on File, Last Opened, this folder called 30_Solara MP, that folder. And I will open up a type 2 study file, which is this test_16M. It is a DFQ file. Okay, I'll double click there, and my type 2 study file appears. So the type 2 study file, you can see basically over here different graphics. I am currently pointing at a value chart. Then I'm pointing at a deviation chart. I will talk more about these in some more detail. And then I'm also seeing a form sheet. Okay. This portion I can push down or shift down so that I can see more of the contents. Okay. So typically what you can see, how a type 2 study is designed, is by looking into what we call the masks, or if you'd like to think like the parts mask, the characteristics mask, and the values mask. So here by the blue bolt, we know that it is part number 16, okay, and the description of the part is test example 16, and indented are the characteristics. So 4 different characteristics: 16.1, 16.2, 16.3, and 16.3 characteristics we can focus on. So right now the blue arrow is pointed on characteristic 16.1. When I click on another one, I can see that characteristic in this value chart, as you see, and piece number on the x-axis. Okay. So similarly, all charts will simultaneously show for characteristic 16.2. Now, if we go inside of a parts mask by clicking over here in this icon, you can see in these different fields what we refer to as key fields, that part number, okay, is 16, and part description is test example 16. Similarly, now you can minimize this. Similarly, you can click on the characteristic mask and see that characteristic number is 16.2 in this case, characteristic description is 16, characteristic 16.2. Furthermore, we can see that it says the evaluation type is a type 2 study, and we would feed in how many number of trials, number of parts, number of operators that we want in this study. In this case, we've got 2 trials, 10 parts, 3 operators. So moving from the characteristic mask, if you move over to the values mask, we can see the design of our study. Okay. Just as it says over here, number of trials 2, number of parts 10. So number of parts is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 as you go down. Okay. And number of operators, operator A, operator B, operator C, so 3 operators. So number of operators 3, and number of parts 10, and for each operator, we'll measure those 10 parts 2 different times. Okay, so that's how the study is formulated. Okay. So that was the information about masks. So if I close the masks, and as we get more familiar with the software, we can always navigate and reopen the masks as and when needed. I just close the parts mask also. Okay. If we look at the value chart next to see how the study actually worked out eventually, having input all the measurements. So for this particular characteristic 16.2, we can see how the study is trending based on parts, trials, and operators. And then we can also use the form sheet. So if we use the form sheet, we can basically see, as I mentioned previously, this area, which is the percentage gauge R&R percentage. Okay. And this is depending on an evaluation method, which is called QDAS Measurement Process Capability 01-2020, Type 2, and ANOVA method is used. So the gauge R&R percentage came out to be 18.33%, and our targets for the gauge R&R study are specified here. So it should be less than 15% for the gauge R&R study to pass. If it is between 15 and 30, then the gauge R&R study is conditionally capable. In this case, it's 18.33, which means it's conditionally capable. If it were to exceed 30%, then this gauge R&R study would not be a successful one, or not to be a study that should be taken into consideration. So if I flip to a different characteristic, I can see, say for instance, the first one, 16.1, fails the gauge R&R study because the measurements came to percentage, gauge R&R came to 30.55, based off of equipment variation, appraiser variation percentage, interaction percentage, formulas used to come up with the gauge R&R percentage. So if we want to focus on this characteristic, which is 16.1, we can again go back to the value chart individuals. We can look at it, okay? We can look at the form sheet. Each of the graphics that are currently open will show up also over here. So you may interchange among them. So if we're looking at the form sheet for this 16.1 characteristic, this gauge R&R study doesn't pass. Okay. So one other important thing is overall evaluation. When we see over here that system resolution input is an important input that is needed for the software to be able to provide the user with an overall gauge R&R percentage. So the system resolution typically would be under, when we click start, it would be under the characteristic mask, and this field would be where a resolution number or should be input basically, and the execute evaluation button, the green button, should be put. And then you should look at the form sheet once more, and this time the software was able to provide us an overall evaluation based on the percentage resolution, the minimum number of values needed for the study, and the overall gauge R&R percentage. So all of these three criteria need to be met in order for either for a smiley face. In this case, we're getting a smiley face would have been a green face. This is a frowny face, which means the overall evaluation failed based on gauge R&R percentage didn't pass, which is underlined. The other one's percentage resolution passed, which is it's less than 5% of tolerance. Okay, and the minimum number of values we have, okay, for this study. So there's 60, which is the product of parts times trials times operators. Okay, thank you very much. For more detailed details about gauge R&R study, we will be happy to work with you. Thank you for your time today.